A very good evening to you from the Mwembwe of #Chana edition, that is the Tana River County edition. We now transition to the Nation Leadership Forum. Now tomorrow we'll be marking International Anti-Corruption Day. That is the 2022 International Anti-Corruption Day, and joining me in studio to take that conversation forward in terms of taking stock of where we are in the fight against graft. It being, I believe, 19 years since the Convention on the Anti-Corruption Day was adopted in 2003. We are taking stock today with Jackson Mwe, who is Director of Field Services and Coordination, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. And with me in studio, we also have Fatma El-Mawi, who is not only the founder of the Africa Business Ethics Conference, which held its third conference last year. She is also the second vice president of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Good to have both of you in studio. And Jackson, I'll start with you. What is it that a director of field services and coordination does exactly?
Thank you, Holly, for having me. A director of field services and coordination, the ESCC, is responsible for coordinating operations of the commission in the field. As you know, we have activities all over the country. We have regional offices carrying out investigations, preventive work, public education, promotion of ethics, and other programs. So all those programs which are done outside, those are what we refer to as field activities. And that is the work I direct in the commission. All
right, so you know best mambo kwa ground iko vipi?
Ninaelewa vizuri.
Unaelewa vizuri sana.
Yes.
All right, we'll have, as I mentioned, Fatma El-Mawi in studio. So tell me, what prompted the founding of the Africa Business Ethics Conference?
Allow me to, number one, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's been quite an interesting day, and I will talk about what we've been doing the whole of this morning. You see, I'm a trainer. I train for the World Bank, that is IFC, and we train SMEs how they can grow their businesses. Each time we finish the training, people would say, Madam Fatma, we love the training, we will do this, we will do that. But you know what? We have a problem. And the problem is, for my business to grow, I must do this. For me to get a license, I must give this. For me to move forward, I must do this. So it was such a recurring issue that everywhere you go, SMEs down there were complaining that the business environment is actually not very, very favorable. So when SAIP came to Kenya and we were training on business ethics, I was like, oh, let me go and let me start training on ethics. When we knock on people's doors to train them, there was fear. People fear to come to class because they will be called maybe to be corrupt. And also people feared that if they were too clean, nobody will want to do business with them. So that's just a juxtaposition. I mean, here there's fear to come to class, and there's fear that if I come to class, other people will look at me badly. So we said, now what is the best thing? How do we go forward? And we realized that for you to move forward, you must accept that you have a problem. For an alcoholic to be cured, they must accept that they have a problem. So I said, okay, we do have a problem. Corruption is not a Kenyan problem, but it's a problem in Kenya. And that is when we said, why don't we have a conference where we can all sit together and say, this is our problem. How do we solve it as Kenyans? How do Kenyans and Africans solve their problems in their own way? Because most of the conferences on corruption and ethics are actually done in Europe. And then we go there, and when we are told you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. But within EBEC, it's a private sector led, by the way. It's not a government conference. It's the private sector coming together, private sector looking at how do we self-regulate and how do we actually solve this issue of ethics and corruption.
Okay, so and it's interesting that you bring that perspective, because the theme this year is we're highlighting the link between corruption and the delivery of services as well as governance. So corruption, you're saying, is more than just about government. Interesting, because as Kenyans, usually it's government institutions that are in the spotlight when it comes to corruption. So we often don't think about the private sector and how the private sector is part of the problem, because you said corruption is a problem is not a Kenyan problem, but it is a problem in Kenya. But perhaps, Jackson, we should start from this point. Where are we now in the fight against graft? Because the EACC oftentimes gets accused of barking, but being unable to bite.
Thank you, Holly, for that question. And probably I'll start by where Fatma ended. When we talk about corruption, it affects both the public and the private sector. The way we look at it, we look at the public sector as the demand side of corruption, while we look at the private sector as the supply side of corruption. Because there is no corrupt transaction between two public officials. There is no corrupt transaction mainly between private entities. The transaction occurs when the private sector is seeking services from the public. Coming back to your question on where we are, I would say Kenya has made progress in terms of establishing the right infrastructure to contain corruption. Tomorrow, as we celebrate the International Anti-Corruption Day, it is important to know this is a day which was designated to implement the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. When did this convention come into effect? It came into effect because the world recognized that this is a global problem. And therefore, the International Anti-Corruption Day is a day which is observed globally. Tomorrow, the 9th, the entire world will be commemorating, particularly countries which have ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Now, under that convention, it requires all state parties, and Kenya is a state party to that convention, to establish and put in place mechanisms to prevent corruption and bribery. It is important to note, Kenya was the first country in the world to ratify the convention on the 9th of December 2003, just like you have put it earlier. Now, when that was done, there were obligations to establish the legal infrastructure to fight corruption, because you must have the legal infrastructure. 2, there was obligation to set up institutions to fight corruption. Kenya has made progress because we have various laws now which have been enacted for purposes of fighting corruption. We have institutions, and the EACC specifically was set up as the lead agency to fight corruption, because it is an obligation, it is a requirement under the convention that every state party, for which Kenya is a state party, to have a lead agency. So for the case of Kenya, EACC is the lead agency. Now, once that organization is put in place, there is also global realization that it cannot work alone. So EACC went ahead to bring together other stakeholders who will contribute in the fight against corruption. Now, the commemoration we are having tomorrow brings together these various actors. These various actors have been organized under what we call the Kenya Leadership Integrity Forum. It's a forum which brings together about 20 sectors. EACC is one of the sectors. We have the private sector, we have the legislature, we have the judiciary, we have the religious sector, we have the community-based organizations. Basically, everybody is involved. Now, why? Because of that realization, it affects the entire public. In terms of what EACC has been able to achieve in implementing its mandate, for which its mandate is to combat corruption, to prevent the same, educate the public on the dangers of corruption, and promote ethical conduct. When we look at the law enforcement mandate of the EACC, EACC has been focused. It has carried out various law enforcement actions, including high-level, what I will call high-impact investigations. And high-impact investigation, for example, if I just want to look at the last 3 years, EACC has been able to complete 501 high-impact investigations. And
when you say high-impact, what do you mean?
When I talk about high-impact investigations, I'm talking about investigations involving highly placed individuals. These will be people who have monopoly of decision in the areas they operate. I am looking at corruption involving colossal sums of money, and I am also looking at corruption involving great public interest. For example, you may find a corrupt conduct which has occurred, but touching, probably somebody has taken a public school, for example, or a public hospital. Now, that public hospital is responsible for providing service to a great number of people within the locality. If that was to be taken by an individual, then that is a matter of great public interest, and the EACC will prioritize that. Out of these 501 IE-backed investigations which have been done, I will report to the public that 191 of them have been finalized in court, resulting into about 85% conviction rate. People have been convicted.
This is in the last 3 years? In
the last 3 years. People have been convicted. That information is in the public domain. And when you look at...
You said 80 what percent? Convicted?
85%.
85.
And when you look at the kind of people who have been convicted, you realize they cut across the society. We have people who have worked for the government. We have people from the private sector. We have companies which have been fined huge sums of money. And therefore, that goes back to explain everybody is involved. Again, over and above just punishment, EACC realized it is very important to look at the motivation. Why do people engage in corruption, despite the fact that it is a high-risk crime? The reason why people engage in corruption is for personal benefit. Nobody will engage in corruption if they are not intending to accrue something to themselves. So what EACC has done as a matter of strategy is to attack the benefits of corruption. And in it, EACC has a robust mechanism for asset recovery. This is assets which have been acquired through corrupt means. Within the same 3 years, EACC has been able to recover assets worthy about 22 billion.
And my question then would be, where do these monies go? But we do need to take a break.
Correct.
And when we come back, I'm curious to hear from Fatma what the strides made in the private sector have been. And also, you talked about cases. Now, in the recent past, we've seen cases dropped for lack of evidence and claims that the war on graft has been weaponized to fight those in the political class. I'm curious to hear what your sentiments on that are on the other side of this break.
Did you know you pay for more water when you buy regular softener instead of Downy concentrate? Downy is more concentrated, so just 1 liter can freshen and soften as many clothes as 2.5 liters regular softener. Don't pay for more water, pay for all-day freshness.
Did you know shorter is better on YouTube Shorts? Stand a chance to win cash or free data every day. Buy the daily YouTube for 10 bundle and stand a chance to win cash or free data every day. Buy the YouTube for 10 bob bundle. Create a YouTube short with the hashtag shorter is better. Best video with the most likes stands a chance to win weekly cash prizes.
They say it's in your nature. It's a woman thing. It's having a dream and pursuing it, making a plan and working it. It's starting a business and owning it. As a woman in business, let KCB fire up your female-led and made enterprise, KCB Flame. To find out more, WhatsApp 0711 087 087 or call 0711 087 000 and visit us at any KCB branch countrywide.
Indonesia has banned premarital sex and unmarried couples from staying together. Basically, as we speak, major parts of Thika Road, that is from Roysambu to Juja, are illegal in Indonesia. Now,
and 6K na so sifanyi job lakini napewa 6K pengine ka ile ara au niza nigezi manager aje
6000. Kuna mshahara nyingine nilisema si lazima uishi kwa nyumba.
Give to your loved
loved ones this Christmas season.
With what?
Optiven is offering you a variety of exciting properties. For every 125,000 that you spend, either as deposit or installment, we give you 2,500 cashback this Christmas season.
Happy holidays! Have you spotted the Dancing Santa on NTV? SMS the name of the show to 20686. Become the 10th person to do so and win amazing prizes. NTV, turning on your world.
We know your flavor, and that's how you inspire us to always deliver the best quality meals made fresh with locally sourced ingredients. Galitos, bold African flavor.
Get the Galitos Hot Box and a 500 ml Coke soda at just 699 Kenya shillings.
Welcome back to the Nation Leadership Forum, and we're discussing the strides that have been made in the last 19 years since this was adopted. And we're also looking at, as we look at the strides made, we're also looking at the way we have to go, the ways that is left for us to cover. And the theme this year is we are highlighting the crucial link between anti-corruption and peace, security, and development. And before we took the break, I cut Jackson short here. Jackson is the Director of Field Services and Coordination. I cut him short, and he was speaking of the strides made this far. He talked about the high-profile cases they've prosecuted in the last 3 years. High impact is how he puts it. And he says there were 501. 191 have been finalized, 85% of which were in your favor.
Yes.
All right. So 501 prosecuted, is it?
501 prosecuted.
Or, okay.
Wow. 191 now already completed.
Already completed.
Yes.
All right. And you were talking about assets recovered, which is, you were saying the enticement for corruption, of course, is personal benefit.
Yes.
So you were talking about recovering assets to the tune of 22 billion shillings in the last 3 years. That is, the last 3 years would be what? 2019?
2019.
To date.
Yes, just to allow me, Olive, to just complete that trajectory. Like I have mentioned viewers that in the last 3 years, we have been able to recover assets worthy that amount, 22.6 billion. Over and above that, proactively, we have been able to disrupt corruption networks, which would have resulted to public loss amounting to 32.3 billion shillings. That is money, if the commission had done nothing, would have been lost.
Wait, just repeat that figure?
32.3
billion.
3 billion.
Okay.
On top of that, we are also pursuing other cases for recovery, because we recover assets through two methods. One is by filing civil cases in court for purposes of recovery. We also recover assets through alternative dispute resolution. There are people who come forward to the commission. Once we have done investigation, we have told them we have established that you own this particular asset and it is disproportionate to your known sources of income. They come forward, they own them, they say, I'm willing to return. And there's a mechanism established in law on how that is facilitated. So through that, we are able to collectively recover the amount of assets which I have mentioned. But I want to mention that we have about 400 cases, civil cases, which are currently pending in court in various stages, seeking to recover another 34 billion shillings. So if those cases are concluded, we expect to still recover that amount of money.
Okay.
Yes.
My question then would be this, and I want Fatma also to come in and bring us up to speed in terms of what has been done in the private sector, because you talked about demand is public, supply is private, because where they doing business with. But these civil cases, is it a slap on the wrist? Because, you know, choices should have consequences, no? So civil cases, they give up these assets, yes?
Yes.
And then they walk off scot-free? Or is that part of the plea bargaining?
Okay. Recovery does not necessarily interfere with the criminal case. The criminal conduct will still be punished. Out of these cases which I've mentioned, which have been concluded in court, they also go with a parallel civil case. So most of we follow for purposes of punishing the criminal conduct through the investigation. Once we identify that corrupt conduct also resorted into taking public assets, we still recover. So these are two different processes.
Okay.
So you will still be punished for the conduct, and the assets will still be recovered. It is not that once you relinquish the assets, you are left scot-free. No.
Okay.
It doesn't work that way.
And the reason I asked that is because I thought maybe the criminal justice system can be prohibitive. So I thought you opted to go the civil route to at least recover the assets. But we'll continue with that. But first, Fatma, what's been done in the private sector?
The private sector, number one, we have to unfortunately agree the supply side, because it takes two to tango. Okay. What the different associations, for example, Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we've actually gotten our leaders and our county chairman to sign a code of conduct. That's number one. People like KAM, they train, that is Kenya Association of Manufacturers. People like KEPSA did, through KEPSA Foundation, they had the multi-sectoral conference on corruption. And just like tomorrow, they called everybody to come and to actually talk together. Because at the end of the day, business, and now here I go to business, corruption stunts business. Corruption increases the cost of doing business by almost 20%. Now, as a business person, you can't afford to lose 20% of your profits, and it has actually become a budget line because you know that there are so many unexplained expenses. So what we are doing is we are talking to the business people and we are telling them, you started this business so that this business can outlive you, okay? And for this business to outlive you, you must work ethically. So there is a business component, there's a sustainability component there. People like Safaricom, for example, they're very good on compliance. Also because of the international laws. There are some international laws that go beyond geographic jurisdiction. The case in point is a company like Goodyear. Goodyear came and invested in a Kenyan company because they were good. But the Kenyan company was found to be corrupt. So Goodyear, the Kenyan company was not fined, but Goodyear was fined in the US. $16.4 million. So you see, we are cutting FDI into the country.
FDI being foreign direct investment.
Investment into the country, because foreign companies is like, if I go there and my third party actually engages in corruption, I also get fined. That's number one. The other thing is we tell Kenyans, Bribery Act 2017, and now it's the legislation and the instruments are there. But one of the things that this law is going to bite CEOs and heads of departments as well. If you Olive today, you are the head of department and your people are found to be corrupt and you cannot show how you've trained them, how you talked to them about ethics, how you explained to them, you actually also become part of the problem. Whatever sanctions they have, you also have that sanction. So why would you want to be penalized for something you have not done? So what we are telling CEOs, what we are telling heads of departments, you had better make sure you have trained, you have told your people this is bad, so that kikiumana uko chini, you can actually go to court and say, I trained them, I spoke to them, I did this. You can take somebody to the river, but you cannot force them to drink. That way you take yourself. The other thing is, and by the way, we do these trainings with a Center for International Private Enterprise. What they do, they work around the globe. What we do is to train. Some people don't even know what they do is actually corrupt. So we train them that this is accepted, this is not accepted, and then not many organizations are able to transition into what we are calling clean, ethical enterprises. And how do we do it? Incidentally, I didn't know ESCC does that. We do corruption risk mapping. We do corruption assessment for you, and then we tell you this is where you are vulnerable. You need to close these gaps if your company wants to plug into international, global value chains. We have what we are calling 10-80-10. 10% of people will not be corrupt, no matter what the incentive is. Okay? The other 10% will always look for a way to be corrupt, no matter what processes you have put there. So the fight is the 80%. We train the 80%. Do they go to the corrupt? Do they go to the ethical people? Interesting what we had today, we are saying instead of the stick, and I want to say ESCC, maybe the government is a stick. We are looking at the carrot, and the carrot here is, it is in your interest to be ethical because your business will be more sustainable. Number one, it is in your interest to be ethical because if you don't, you will also go with the ones whom you did not stop. So how can we do this? And the analogy is, instead of hitting and hitting and hitting, let ESCC and the government do that. What we do is, if the 10% now, the good 10%, if we can coalesce together, and I know what Olive is doing, what Fatma is doing, what, let's say, Jerry is doing, and we all sit together. These are the people who are ethical. And we talk to organizations and we make them realize that this quick thinking of money today will not last you forever. We also did, this is SIPE together with KEPSA, did a report. And let me tell you, corruption affects the SMEs. Corruption affects the smaller businesses. Corruption favors the bigger businesses. And that is why, oh yes, it is the bigger businesses who enrich, who gain, but the smaller businesses are affected. How are they affected? You start your business today, you've taken a loan, let's say 10 million, you have to give something here, give kidogo there, give kidogo there, so how much are you left with to actually do the business? So we train those SMEs and we tell them you can actually survive, your business can survive without giving a penny. We are calling this the Integrity Champions Network. You are ethical, I am ethical, he is ethical. So why don't we band together? Why don't we talk? Why don't we share our experiences? And this is called collective action. Collective action has worked in Thailand. Collective action has worked in Ukraine. Collective action has even worked in Nigeria. Why can it not work in Kenya? It can be done. So the private sector is doing, but can do so much more.
Okay. Yeah. And Jackson, there's a story, I mean, not a story, but what you're talking about reminds me of Chicken Gate, which James Oswago was found guilty the other day. He's the former he is a former IBC CEO, and there was a Smith and Usman, which was tried, and yes, in the UK, was it? And they were found culpable, and so they dealt with the consequences of that there, and now, so that was the private sector, right?
Yes.
And then there was a public sector where public officials who were tried here, and only recently were they also held accountable for their actions. So I tend to think that example sort of puts it really into perspective of how the two come together. But Jackson, there was a question of weaponization of the fight against graft.
Thank you, Olive, for that question. Just allow me just to bring a perspective to the preventive aspect, which Padma has elaborated on what they are doing in the private sector. It's important to tell Kenyans that ESCC does not just concentrate on law enforcement. The mandate is wider. We also do prevention of corruption. And in prevention of corruption, what we do is to, we work with the ministries and departments and agencies, and even some private sector organizations have come forward where they invite us to look at their systems. We look at their systems. We have a pool of experts, well-trained experts with diverse professionals who look at the systems, identify where loopholes exist, which can be exploited by the 10%, the 80% which partners mentioned, who are so motivated to commit corruption. So we are able to work with them to seal those loopholes. And once we seal those loopholes, we see improvement in those kind of organizations. And in doing that, we have done that in more than 20 ministries so far. And we have done that in more than 26 county governments, both the executives and the county assemblies. The counties which we have reviewed and given them advice, and where we have had governors and the administration who are keen in implementing those implementations, those counties are generally doing better than the ones which still entertain those kind of loopholes.
I remember the Machakos governor the other day, is she still newly installed? But the serving Machakos governor, and Wavinya Ndeti, and she was talking about payroll issues. So is that part of what you do?
These are the things we do because we identify how money is being lost through the payroll. Then we advise them on how to seal those loopholes. Coming back just to mention about the issue of weaponization of corruption.
All right, we are leaving you on a cliffhanger. We're taking a break. But when we come back, he's going to answer that question. And also, this 600 billion shillings, we've made all these gains in the war against graft, and you're working also at prevention. We have saved 32.3 billion shillings that could have been lost through corruption. Then how are we still losing this 600 billion shillings annually, which is equivalent to 1/3 of Kenya's annual budget? On the other side of this break.
Centum Real Estate offers you an opportunity to own a home in a serene environment. Talk to us today on 0713 877 777 or text 2 Rivers to 22365.
Hey guys, let's take a selfie.
Oh, wait.
Woo! It's a video!
We the young are not a complicated bunch. You see, we take each day as a clean slate. Why turn down the volume when you can turn up the vibe? Boom! This land wants you to live in the here and now.
The coolest.
There's so much more to see. Come journey with us.
Kikosi cha NTV kimekita kambi katika kaunti ya Tana River kukufahamisha mengi kuhusu yale yanayopatikana hapa, ikiwemo tamaduni za kuridhisha nafsi, maisha ya wafugaji, miongoni mwa sekta mbalimbali za kiuchumi kama vile utalii, kilimo na hata biashara.
Kuna mahali inaitwa Miembeni huko chini kabisa. Ni mahali mzuri sana, kuna upepo mzuri, baridi kabisa, mnaweza pumzika.
Kwa muda mwingi uzoefu ni kwamba tunaalikwa sehemu zingine sisi, lakini this time tuna furaha ya kwamba tumealika watu. Kuna ngoma za kitamaduni, hata mimi utanipata huko.
Kuna vitu vingi sana nadhani mtajionea.
Did you know you pay for more water when you buy regular softener instead of Downy concentrate? Downy is more concentrated, so just 1 liter can freshen and soften as many clothes as 2.5 liters regular softener. Don't pay for more water, pay for all-day freshness.
This is NTV.
Tonight, Azimio cancels its much-touted Jamhuri Day parallel celebrations.
The Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party will now not hold a parallel Jamhuri Day celebration.
As claims of coercion from government emerge.
It would be bad manners to proceed. It would be an insult and dancing on the graves of our forefathers who fought for independence.
Also tonight, Francis Wanderi becomes the 3rd commissioner to resign from electoral body IEBC as Irene Masit stays put. Plus,
mimi na Cleo na Tindi Mwale tulikuwa tunakula na wewe mpaka dakika ya mwisho tukisema vile tutaunda hii serikali mpaka last minute, lakini upepo ikashika hapa nje.
President William Ruto storms Raila Odinga's strongholds as he seeks to consolidate his Western Kenya support base.
Watu wa Kakamega pia na watu wa Western, mimi nataka niwahakikishie ya kwamba wakati tutapanga harakati ya maendeleo na tayari tumeanza, hakuna sehemu ya Kenya itawachwa nyuma.
And NTV is back on the road. We bring you the sights and sounds of the county of Tana River.
Happy holidays! Have you spotted the Dancing Santa on NTV? SMS the name of the show to 20686. Become the 10th person to do so and win amazing prizes. NTV, turning on your world.
Welcome back to the Nation Leadership Forum, and we're interrogating matters anti-corruption. It's being the International IACD, International Anti-Corruption Day tomorrow. The private sector, Fatma tells me, commemorated it, marked it today. They met, discussed the way forward. We'll be looking at the way forward and look at how we can we can get rid of this 600 billion. Okay, we can not get rid of it, but make it impossible as much as possible to steal 600 billion shillings annually, lose economic loss and inefficiency is what tallies up to 600 billion shillings annually. But Jackson, we left people on a cliffhanger. You know, when you're watching a movie or a series and then the question of weaponization of the fight against graft.
Thank you, Olive. The issue of weaponization has largely been a public perception that the war against corruption has been weaponized, which indirectly implies that the institutions charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption probably would use any other consideration other than what they are mandated by law to carry out their mandate. I just want to go on record that EACC, one, as I said, when you look at the history of why it is established as the lead agency, and the same domesticated in this country in our Constitution under Article 79. EACC is established as an independent ethics and anti-corruption commission. That already means, from the words of the Constitution, EACC is not under control of any authority, other than the reporting mechanisms established by the law. EACC reports on its programs and activities to the National Assembly. And the way it reports to the National Assembly is through annual reports, quarterly reports, and other periodic reports as need might arise. Let me touch on the oversight on how that process is done. EACC as an organization, basically I would look at it as two organizations in one. We have the commission, which is basically comprised of a chairperson and 4 other commissioners. These are independent from the secretariat. The secretariat is the bureaucracy which is charged with the day-to-day running of the operations of the commission, which is headed by a chief executive officer, who is also the secretary to the commission. When you look at that, the work of the secretariat is oversighted by the commission, because the commission is independent of the secretariat. The commissioners of the EACC serve on a part-time basis. Their role is to oversight and provide policy direction to the secretariat. The work of EACC, again, is not started and completed by EACC. Our investigative processes, which are done by highly trained professionals, I will tell you, EACC as all the professionals you would think of. We have lawyers who are employed as investigators. We have engineers, we have procurement experts, we have accountants, we have all professionals, because corruption affects all sectors. When you are investigating a road project, you don't just want to send somebody who is just trained on detective operations. You send an engineer who understands the engineering science of developing a road, and they are able to identify where standards have been compromised. Those are the professionals which EACC has been able to employ. Then after employing these professionals, there is a conversion program which we do, where now we convert them to investigators. You are employed as a lawyer, then we convert you to an investigator. We employ you as a doctor, we convert you to an investigator. You will definitely become a very superior investigator. Now, these professionals, when they do their work, there are review mechanisms. There are internal review mechanisms which are done at the secretariat level. After the secretariat, the work is done by the secretariat. The work must be presented to the commission, who are independent, who are not involved in the day-to-day operations. If it is an investigation which has been done, it must be presented to a committee of the commission. If the committee of the commission is convinced that the work has been done professionally as provided under the law, and all the safeguards have been made, they will consent to forward that file to the Director of Public Prosecution, because EACC does not carry out prosecution. Then the Director of Public Prosecution evaluates the work of EACC independently, and makes a decision on whether to provide consent, to charge, or not to charge. Once the director is satisfied by that evidence, then the director will move to court. And when the matter is in court, the role of EACC is to support the Director of Public Prosecution in moving the case. And how do we support? Probably by bringing witnesses, bringing materials which we collected during investigation to the prosecutor in court. So when you look at that kind of mechanism, it is very difficult for any group or any stage of that process for anybody to be able to take control of that process, because the work done by the investigators will be oversighted by the management. The decisions of the management are oversighted by the commission. Decisions of the commission are oversighted again by the Director of Public Prosecution. The process in which reports for investigations are received in EACC is a very elaborate process. We received in excess of 9,000 reports every year. Out of those reports, we find on average about 3,500 reports relate to our mandate. The reports which relate to our mandate, we will use different mechanisms to deal with them. There are reports which will come with sufficient details to start an outright forensic investigation. Most of them will come with wide gaps because they are collected by well-meaning members of the public, or reports of committees such as committees of parliament, reports of the Auditor General, and other sources of information. When those reports come, we subject them to what we call a preliminary investigation. A preliminary investigation is an efficient way of determining whether the commission should put in resources on a matter which will lead to public good without necessarily deploying resources on a matter which will just end in closure. Once that is established, preliminary evidence is obtained, and we are sure now the smoke we are seeing relates to some fire underneath, then we are able now to put resources and carry out investigation using that kind of process. So when we talk about weaponization, it's mainly, in my view, the kind of safeguards which have been put take care of that concern. And what I would recommend, even to members of the public, is to always remain very vigilant. Because for us, we keep our doors open. When reports are brought by members of the public, they are free to make follow-ups. Every report we receive, we acknowledge. Members of the public come forward to make for follow-ups on their matters, and we always update them on the stage in which we are dealing with these matters. And therefore, it is very difficult for an investigator or a lawyer to interfere with a case. It is even very difficult, even for a commissioner or even the chief executive officer to interfere with a case because of the review mechanisms established in law. I believe EACC has professionally adhered to the requirements of the commission to operate as an independent ethics and anti-corruption commission.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and let's look at the way forward now, especially where the private sector is concerned, because when tenders are inflated in a pen such as this, which retails for about 10 shillings, 10 to 20 shillings, you know, ends up being sold at, I don't know, 100 bob.
100, yes.
You know, how can we address this economic loss and inefficiency that results to losing 600 billion shillings annually, a third. It's an astounding figure of Kenya's budget.
And can you imagine that third of our budget, how many hospitals it would have built, how many schools it would have built? And this is where you say that this thing is evil, okay? Now, what we did today is to say that what gives way, what gives rise to that 600 billion to go away is one thing very small and very simple. It's for good men to keep quiet. As long as you are a good person, you do not corrupt, you do not engage. I am not talking about picketing here. I am not talking about haki yetu here. But I am talking about if I am credible, I am ethical, I should be able to talk to another colleague and, you know, sort of like let it cascade downwards. Today, we had representation from a lot of counties. I was surprised in Kenya, which means that the private sector is actually concerned, and they are concerned because if their businesses are unable to grow, if we are unable to get foreign direct investment, simply because we are deemed to be unsafe, we are deemed to be corrupt, then we are in trouble. Because remember, we need to create employment. And as far, when there are 10 jobs given, maybe public sector would only take 2. 80% would actually go to the private sector. So the private sector needs to be able to create jobs. And how do they create jobs? They are only able to create jobs when they are able to grow their businesses. How are they able to grow their businesses? When they can work, when they can export, when we can, if the, what do you call that, vifarangas from Kenya go to Uganda, because we are the ones who send them, and then the eggs from Uganda becomes cheaper than the eggs from Kenya. Don't you think something is not quite right there? So one of the things that we discussed 2 things today, very important. One is what we call ethics first. Having ethical businesses to be listed in a database so that when foreign investors come to Kenya, we tell them these are the ethical companies that you are able to work with. And the reason is not because, just like Chicken Gate, they were not fined in Kenya. Just like Goodyear, they were not fined in Kenya. They were actually fined in their countries of origin. So people are scared. That's number one. Number two, how do we coalesce these people of good ethics? How do they know each other? For example, Safaricom has done so much. KCB has done so much. Maybe Airtel has done so much. Telcom has. How do we learn from each other? How do I get to know, Olive, this is what you're doing and it has worked for you? Some organizations don't even know what they do is actually corrupt. I'll give an example. I trained Comesa on the same thing. And then this lady came up, she's in mining, and she said, God Almighty, I did not know. How does your staff get an iPhone 13 as a present? Something is wrong there. So, it simply means you need to have a gift policy. Of course, if I give you iPhone and iPad and iNote and whatever, I will be looked after first, isn't it? At the expense of other clients. Now, this company was losing loyal, old-time customers because the newcomers were giving the iPhones. And we explained to her and we took her through. And she said, I did not know that I was actually abetting corruption. So by joining the Integrity Champions Network, we are able to show you that this is acceptable, this is okay, this is not acceptable. There are companies here in Kenya, you cannot give a gift that is more than 5,000. And if, to quote, by the goodness of your heart, if you want to give more, it goes to all the staff, to not one particular staff. The other thing that came out, sometimes people don't want to be corrupt, but the budgets, the targets, the sales. So people, Kenyans, we like shortcuts. So people take shortcuts. So what we are saying, if as an organization, I give you a target, Olive, but I also give you a target on ethics. What did you do? How did you abate? It should not just be numbers and numbers and numbers. It's also about the ethics. How should be more important than the final? It is not always what Machiavelli told us, that the end justifies the means. No,
Yes.
it doesn't.
All right.
No, it doesn't.
So you're saying including kickbacks in the budget line?
Yes.
Is a no-no. But Jackson, from the EACC's perspective, because something that Fatma raised was the question of the carrot and the stick, which way forward? What can we do better?
Thank you, Oli, for that. I think it would be good just to make a statement on the issue you have raised about the 600 billion, which is lost, or which is perceived to be lost on an annual basis. Of course, that is calculated from our national budgets. There are several ways in which that statement finds credence. It is important for members of the public to know that projects implemented by government, and particularly when you look at high budget kind of projects, you are constructing a road, you are constructing a building. When you are doing an infrastructure project is intended to provide a certain service, a benefit to the public. That's the only time the value is realized. Before that project is completed, if you are to do a building like this Nation Center, then you do the shell, you'll still sink several billions. If corruption was to come in and then the money is taken away and you are not able to complete the building, even if you have some 10 stories of an incomplete building, that shell does not provide any benefit to the public. You will have sunk several billions into that shell, which renders no benefit to the public. Look at an hospital you have built, you have not equipped. Again, it renders no benefit to the public. These are some of the ways in which public wastage has been witnessed in our country. This wastage is part of what is quantified in that loss of the 600 billion. Of course, there is outright theft, and the people who are involved in that outright theft, they are the people I mentioned. All law enforcement activities are being done, but we cannot say we have been able to reach everyone. There are still people who have committed corruption, whose action has not yet been taken because of capacity-related issues, but it is important for people to note that corruption cases don't expire. You may commit an offense today, you'll be investigated 10 years, 20 years later. The consequences are the same. When you look at the public sphere, you are finding people who committed corruption many years back when they served in public office. Now in old age, when they are hailing, when they need a lot of support, we are seeing some of them being dragged into court. It's a painful thing. It is something Kenyans should look at. It is something Kenyans should reflect and desist from the appetite of corruption, because it does not help anyone. Because once these resources, as I have said, are taken away, it results into many problems. Because if there is corruption, almost everything shatters. Your security systems won't be penetrated. People are able to come in. People are able to bring unaccustomed goods if they have been able to penetrate and corrupt the border controls, the airports, and other controls. When they bring that, definitely, what happens to the private sector? The private sector will shrink, because a business person who is doing an honest business, who is paying taxes, will not be able to compete with the grey economy, people who are in the black market, who are bringing unaccustomed goods. And therefore, when you look at the consequences of corruption, to a nation, you can attribute virtually all the problems we are currently experiencing in the country, including climate change, to corruption.
So we have 2 minutes left, in fact less. So quickly, in a minute each, if possible, what needs to happen moving forward?
Thank you, Holly, for that. Hope is not lost. We can still do a lot. And that's the reason why, like in this commemoration, we are bringing the various sectors together. Because the realization is when everybody takes care of their area. If it is the religious sector, let them come up with programs which promote good governance, good ethics, and basically prevention of corruption. Private sector, the same. Once we establish self-regulation in every sector, the media take it as an agenda and educate the public. Because education is very critical. We must inform people the dangers of corruption. These are some of the things you can do, and over time, you can be able to realize great benefits. Otherwise, the interventions which are currently being done, some of them are reactive because corruption has already taken place. But the ultimate in the fight against corruption is to prevent. And to prevent, you need everybody. And you bring them to excel in their spheres of influence. That is how we can benefit. We need to bring programs to young children in school. We need to bring...
which I can see you're already doing.
Yes.
It's been included in the curriculum.
Correct.
So I'll also give you occasion to quickly tell us what we need to do more of in the private sector.
Number one is we are training more. We are getting more and more people. As I said today, we had a lot of people from the other counties coming in. So this discussion, and we are explaining to them that this short-termism, you know, like what you want now, is not going to last. You'd rather have a business that is sustainable. And to be honest with you, we are now seeing people actually listening, because before people were not listening. The other thing is the winner should not always take all. It's all about, yes, you need the targets, yeah, you need this, but you also need to make sure that your company's brand is looked at positively. You do not want to see your company having done something bad after you've gotten the money, and then you actually go down because of what you have done.
All right. And allow me to conclude the conversation at this point. We are time bad, and this is a conversation that requires quite a bit of time, right? Like you're saying, the media should also take up its responsibility and raise public awareness on the cost of corruption. The true cost of corruption. I'm seeing some of what else the EACC identified as challenges is politicization, ethnicization of the war against corruption, slow judicial processes which lead to witness fatigue and memory loss, and a weak legal framework, inadequate enforcement mechanisms for Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And also, as far as the advisories we were talking about, lack of enforcement mechanisms for implementation of advisories and recommendations of EACC arising from system reviews. So the conversation continues online. The hashtag is United Against Corruption. The official International Anti-Corruption Day takes place tomorrow. I'm told the big event will be at the Kenya School of Government, Kabete. We've had Jackson Mwe, Director, Field Services and Coordination. And we've also had Fatma El-Mawi, who is not only the second Vice President of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She's also the founder of the Africa Business Ethics Conference. We conclude a Nation Leadership Forum on that note, but we have Ben Kitili coming up with the 9 p.m. news on NTV tonight, and he's joined by none other than Dan Mwangi in Tana River County, the hashtag Chana edition. Do stay tuned.